Welcome back. Before we think together through Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and then Samuel, Kings, and so on, I'd like us to think for a few moments about Hebrew history and Hebrew historiography. I think the pump should have been well primed by your readings from my colleague David Howard and friend Bob Chisholm, as well as the good work Phil Long have pumped out in several very helpful discussions. So, for the sake of time, let's just hit a few highlights. Definition, you've read. What does history mean? Well, how do you define history? Well, facts, or an account of those facts, or a study of the account of those facts. Historiography is any written history. It's the historian here who does the talking, not the events. So it's interpretive. In modern historiography, there's the notion that at least two witnesses are required. This rule of methodology is often flaunted by off-the-hip momentary historians of the contemporary press, but it remains an expectation of a serious historiography. Well, what do we do with the Bible? The Hebrew Bible is the opening and really the majority section of Scripture. It's the first 77% of the Christian Scriptures. But you know, it's the lack of that second witness we just mentioned to so many of the historical narratives in the Hebrew Bible that has given biblical scholars in the historical critical tradition fits and caused so many to conclude that the biblical accounts just are not historically plausible. But you know, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Yeah, it's a truism, whether in the discipline of historiography or criminology or physical science. So, maybe a corollary for us to ponder is the absence of corroborating evidence is not evidence it didn't happen. As we read the text of Scripture, and for that matter, other ancient Near Eastern texts, we recognize that a historian has a number of resources to utilize, that is, if those resources have been discovered. One source would be material remains. You know, lots of folks tend to think of ancient history in terms of the ruins of buildings, or monumental or otherwise, or maybe the contents found in tombs, or tools and other implements, you know, the sort of things you find in a museum. And the biblical writers do make reference to memorials for the benefit of their readers and subsequent generations. You see them peppered throughout Genesis 28, 31, Exodus 28, Joshua 4, 24. And then you have reference made to Jacob's pillar at Rachel's tomb, or the ruins of Ai in Joshua 8, or Joshua's memorial stones that he picked up out of the Jordan River and set up at Gilgal, or the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, these ruins, these material remains, are significant in helping us to understand everyday life back in antiquity. Help us reconstruct where they sheltered and slept, or worshipped, or administered a community or empire. They don't give us what we need to write history. The tools, for example, will certainly provide some color to history by providing insight into how they made a living. But they don't provide the most basic need for doing history. That is a text. Then there's what might be called incidental sources. I mean, just the raw material of specific incidents, such as building inscriptions, correspondence, receipts, court records and laws and treaties. We talked about the limu, the eponym list, a couple of weeks ago, or Hammurabi's law code, or Shishak's annals of his invasion of Canaan, or Shalmaneser III's stela, or the Lachish ostraca. The biblical historian uses raw material, and at times he refers his readers to other sources. For example, the Book of the Wars of the Lord in Numbers 21, or the Book of Genealogy in Nehemiah 7, or the Book of the Records, the Annals perhaps, of Esther 6. So we've got, just the raw material, artifacts, and then incidental sources, referring to specific incidents. But then there's a third, there's exegetical sources. These are analytical and interpretive texts. We've already worked through a number of them. Numbers, for example, is one. Joshua, we're getting into. Esther, down the pike. You've got Annals of the Asiatic Campaign of Thutmose III, or Sargon's conquest of Samaria, or Sennacherib's siege of Jerusalem, or the Babylonian Chronicle reporting the fall of Jerusalem. So there are those kinds of sources that are available for us to work with. We get back, we want to talk about some of the issues of Hebrew historiography. So we'll see you in a bit.